All right, so here is the big question of the day. What is franchising? Well, most people think they know what franchising is until they actually look into buying one. This video breaks down exactly what franchising is, what you get when you buy a franchise, and why it's one of the most powerful ways to own a business today. In this video, we're going to cover the FTC's legal definition of franchising in plain English, what you actually receive when you become a franchise owner, what franchising gives buyers a head start that independent business owners don't have, or why franchising gives buyers a head start that independent businesses don't have, and then how to know if franchise ownership is the right path for you. These are all critical things. Okay, cool. So the way that this format's going to work and this series is going to work is I'm going to go straight to Google as if you were doing the search as well, just to make sure that we're seeing everything. You know, one of the things that I see a lot in the franchising space is you'll run into this situation where franchisee candidates, and rightfully so, they won't trust. They're not going to believe just what, some broker says or some FSO or even a franchise development rep that's part of the actual company, right? They have this push in their mind, whether it's a consultant or any of those roles, to think, I'm just going to get sold to. And I think that that's 100% fair because unfortunately in the franchising space, there is a lot of that. And it's not even selling in a way that feels like it makes sense for the size and the scope of a purchase. A lot of times it feels like a very push style of selling, which is unhealthy for everybody, especially when you're making a big decision that's akin to, buying a house, but certainly bigger than that in the sense of it's setting up your future, right? So having that fundamental understanding and respect of knowing where you're coming from, how you're approaching things, and putting it in a way that's honest and trustworthy for you as a franchisee candidate is a really significant thing. So we'll just start here and go straight to our old dear friend Google. So what is the definition of, let's go ahead and say, what is the definition of franchising? All right. So, okay, I just typed in what is the definition of franchising into Google, and I want to walk you through what comes up here because the actual definition of this is worth knowing. You're going to see the FTC come up if you go through all these searches, which is the Federal Trade Commission. They're the government body that oversees franchising in the United States, and their definition breaks it down into three parts. You've got a franchisor, that's the brand, the company that built the system, who licensed their name and their way of doing business to a franchisee. The franchisee is the owner, the person who runs it on a day-to-day basis. And in exchange for that license, the franchisee pays fees, an upfront fee to come in, and then ongoing royalties of different sizes and shapes as the business grows. All right. Now, here's what's important about this. All three pieces have to be there: the brand license, the operating system, and the fees for something to legally qualify as a franchise. That's what separates a true franchise from just buying the right to use somebody's logo. You're getting a whole system. And the system is really the whole point, because what a franchisee gives you, or a franchise gives you, is access to something that took years of their time to build, sometimes decades, and a significant amount of capital to really build and to figure out. You get to walk in on day one with all that already working, and it's a powerful, powerful thing for you as a franchisee candidate. And it's very different from trying to start a business from scratch and figure out all the systems and departments and the processes and all of that kind of stuff, especially if you don't have a background with that. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what do you get when you buy a franchise? So let's just go ahead and type this in. What do you get when you buy a franchise? Beautiful. So you're going to see the Google definition up here as well as a bunch of things below. But when you search, what do you get when you buy a franchise? And this is really the heart of it, because when people think about buying a franchise, they sometimes only think about the cost side. But let me show you what's actually on the other side of that equation. When you buy a franchise, you're getting a proven business model. You're getting a brand that people already recognize and trust. You're getting a training program that tells you exactly how to run the business from day one. You're getting ongoing support from a team whose entire job is to help you succeed. And you're getting a system, an operations manual, marketing support, supplier relationships that you would have had to spend years of your own time building if you started on this from scratch. Think about what it costs somebody to start an independent business. And this is a really important thing. They have to figure out the product, the pricing, the marketing, the hiring, the systems, and all of that through trial and error. And a lot of trial and error, right? A lot of the most painful and expensive lessons in business have already been learned when you get into a franchise system, and they've been solved for. And that's what you're buying into. Now, you're operating under the franchisor's brand and you'll follow their system. That's the structure. Within that structure, you own a real business. You build equity. You have something that you can grow and even eventually sell if you want to. And that's a really meaningful thing. And it's also an important thing, especially that last point of eventually being able to sell that. Because some people think if I get into a franchise system, am I in this forever? No, you can actually sell it eventually. And one of the biggest things that a lot of people don't tell you is that there is a major franchise multiplier when you are bought into a good franchisor. Think about it like this, and I'll make this really brief. Imagine that you are just starting your own gym from the ground up, right? Like you get your equipment, do all that, you try to like build it up in the community. That's all great. Well, let's say that you're calling it Ron's Gym. And I know you're not going to call it that, right? But let's say it's called Ron's Gym. When you go to sell that, who do people think own that gym? They think Ron owns that gym, right? And so they're buying this from Ron. And so there is a multiplier for your work and your effort and all the stuff that you bought, okay? But think about it like this. Let's say that you go to buy an Orange Theory that I believe has like 1,400 locations, or an Alpha Fit Club, which is growing vastly in the boutique fitness space, or whatever. There's a million gyms out there. When you buy something like that, because they have such a strong name recognition, especially in the communities that they're in, when you buy something like that and then you go to resell it, that name recognition and those systems and those processes and all that's established by the franchisor is in the mind of the buyer as well, because they're not only getting your work and your effort that you put in to build that business, they're also getting all of the other things that come from the power of that brand, which is where you start to see this multiplier, right? Which is where, like when you're selling a business that's Ron's Gym, you might sell it for a 3 or 4x multiplier. When you're selling something that's a franchise, you could, in theory, sell it for a 9 to 14x multiplier. Not always. And I want to make that clear because I don't want to be dishonest, but you could start to see that because of that, right? And that's the power of buying into a system and then reselling a business like that, opposed to just building your own thing and selling it from scratch. And it's not something that a lot of business brokers will tell you because they don't want to tell you that, right? But it's the truth and it's the reality of this, okay? Cool. So let's move into the next search. The next search that I want to do here is the benefits of franchising over starting your own business. All right. And so you're going to see a bunch of different things through here. You're going to see the AI overview, obviously, and then the sponsored results of people wanting to get you to look at their website, right? So this is the last search in this first video here. The benefits of franchising over starting your own business. And I want to show you this because what comes up here is something that a lot of people who are exploring this space don't think about until later in the process. So look at what keeps coming up over and over across these results. Lower risk of failure, established brand recognition, built-in customer base, access to training and support, faster path to opening. These aren't just talking points. These are the reasons that tens of thousands of people every year choose franchise ownership over just going it alone. And we're seeing this continuing to grow, right? So the biggest reason why businesses fail in their first few years is that the owner is figuring everything out for the first time and they're under an immense amount of pressure, whether that's family or friends or money or whatever it is. Franchising removes a massive portion of that uncertainty, right? The model's been tested. The mistakes have been made by someone else before you got there. You get to learn from a system that's already been through it and proven that it can overcome it, right? And so you're really paying for their mistakes, but you're paying for the solutions to those mistakes so that you don't have to make those things, which is a huge benefit. Now, that does not mean that franchising is for everybody. No, the right franchise for the right person is a powerful thing. And figuring out whether that's you and which opportunity makes sense is exactly what we help people do, which is really a great segue into what's next. The next video is about the franchise disclosure document, the FDD. It's a legal document every franchisor has to give you before you move forward, and understanding it is one of the most important things that you can do as a buyer. I'm going to walk you through exactly what that is because there's a lot of confusion around that, especially around this belief of, is the franchise disclosure document the same thing as a franchise agreement? If I sign the receipt for a franchise disclosure document, does that mean that I'm buying a franchise? No, it does not. It's a Federal Trade Commission, FTC regulated document that is sent out so that you can see all of the details about that brand before you even take the next step in the process of the franchise agreement. And we'll go through all those things. But if you're already curious about what franchise ownership could look like for you specifically, definitely reach out to our team at Unitlock Franchising. We represent a bunch of brands. We have a huge amount of brands in our network. And so there are things that we can do to help you find the right fit. But the main thing for us is if we're going to consult on that with you, we want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of franchising. We want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of business ownership, as well as learning about your goals, where you're landing from a liquid capital standpoint, all these foundational things to be able to point you in a direction that makes sense for you to better your life, not to create more stress. Thank you so much for watching. I cannot wait to continue talking with you about the incredible topic of franchising.